An innocent man was almost jailed for life, until his 8-year-old son exposed a shocking truth in court. But what really happened that night? Watch till the end to uncover the full story. Friends, before I share today's episode, I want to tell you an interesting stat. 99% of the people who watch our content enjoy it, but they haven't subscribed to our channel yet. If you're one of those 99%, all you need to do is a small task. Just look below this video, you'll see a subscribe button. All you have to do is click that subscribe button. It's as simple as that. And if you want, you can also press the bell icon so that you're the first to know whenever we upload a new video. Now let's dive into the video. The rain poured heavily, drenching the quiet streets of a small town. Thunder rumbled in the sky as the streetlights flickered. Through the darkness, a little boy, Noah, just 8 years old, ran barefoot, his tiny feet splashing through puddles. His clothes were soaked and stained with blood. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. Lightning flashed. Noah stumbled but kept running. His small frame trembled from the cold, but something far worse gripped him: fear. At the police station, a tired officer at the front desk, Officer Jenkins, sipped his coffee, flipping through a case file. The station was mostly quiet, just another rainy night. Suddenly, the front doors swung open with a loud bang. Jenkins jumped from his seat as Noah collapsed on the wet floor, gasping for breath. His small hands shook, his eyes wild and unfocused. Alarmed, Officer Jenkins rushed toward him. "Hey, kid! What happened? Are you hurt?" Noah didn't answer. He didn't say a single word. He just lifted a trembling hand and pointed outside. Jenkins frowned. "Where, kid? What is it?" Noah lifted his hand again, this time pointing toward the dark alley across the street. Red and blue lights flashed as police cars sped toward the alley. Officers jumped out, weapons drawn. The alley was silent except for the sound of rain hitting the pavement. Detective Ethan Collins arrived, pulling his coat tighter against the rain. "What do we got?" he asked, stepping toward Officer Jenkins. Jenkins gestured to the lifeless body on the ground. A man lay in a pool of blood, stabbed multiple times. His shirt was torn, his hands limp, his face was frozen in terror. Collins knelt down, eyes narrowing. He recognized the man. "That's Daniel Carter, a lawyer," he said grimly. Another officer spoke up. "And the kid?" He saw it happen. Collins looked back at Noah, who stood shivering under a police officer's jacket. His eyes were filled with something deeper than fear. Something broken. Later, inside the police station, Noah sat silently in a chair. A steaming cup of hot chocolate sat in front of him, untouched. Collins knelt in front of the boy, his voice soft. "Noah, we need your help. You were there. You saw what happened." Noah didn't respond. He just stared at the wall, his small hands gripping his knees. Collins sighed, running a hand through his wet hair. He stood up and turned to Jenkins. "He's in shock. He won't talk," he said, frustrated. Officer Jenkins looked at the boy, his face full of pity. Poor kid, whatever he saw, it must have been bad. In the corner of the room, Noah lowered his head, his lips pressed together as if holding something inside, something too terrifying to say. But one thing was clear. Noah was the only witness, and he wasn't speaking. Detective Collins stood in his dimly lit office, staring at the case file on his desk. The crime scene photos showed Daniel Carter's lifeless body, stabbed multiple times. He had been a well-respected lawyer, known for taking on tough corruption cases. But something about this case didn't sit right. Collins exhaled, rubbing his temple, then flipped open a police report. The suspect's name glared back at him in bold letters. Leo Walker, 38 years old. A troubled man with a criminal past. Multiple arrests for assault, theft, and bar fights. But more importantly, he was the father of the only witness, Noah Walker. Collins leaned back, staring at Noah through the interrogation room's one-way mirror. The boy still hadn't spoken a word. Just then, Officer Jenkins walked in, dropping a fresh report on the desk. "Just came in. We found fingerprints on the murder weapon." Collins sat forward, eyes narrowing. "Whose?" Jenkins hesitated before answering. "Leo Walker." A heavy silence filled the room. Collins clenched his jaw, Damn it. If Leo's fingerprints were on the knife, the case seemed open and shut, but something still felt off. That night, police cars surrounded a small, run-down house on the outskirts of town. Inside, Sarah Walker, Noah's mother, held her son close, trying to stay calm. A loud knock shook the door. "Open up, NYPD." The door swung open, revealing Leo Walker standing in the doorway. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw clenched. "What the hell is this?" Before he could react, officers grabbed him, forcing him against the wall. Collins stepped forward. "Leo Walker, you're under arrest for the murder of Daniel Carter." Sarah's face turned pale. "No, this is a mistake. Leo didn't do this." But Leo didn't resist. He just stared at his son. Noah clutched his mother's waist, eyes locked on his father. Leo's voice softened. "Noah, you know I didn't do this." Noah lowered his head, gripping his mother's dress tighter. He still said nothing. As the officers pulled Leo away, Sarah cried out desperately, "Noah, tell them the truth. Tell them your father didn't do this." But Noah didn't move. He just watched as the police car drove away, taking his father into the night. Hours later, in the police station, Leo sat across from Collins in the dim interrogation room. His hands were cuffed to the table, his jaw tight. Collins leaned forward. "Leo, you have a record. You've been in and out of trouble for years." Leo scoffed, shaking his head. "I've made mistakes, but I didn't kill anyone." Collins slid a crime scene photo across the table. Daniel Carter, lying in a pool of blood. Leo's face remained unreadable. Collins tapped his fingers on the table. "Then how did your fingerprints end up on the murder weapon?" Leo frowned. "My fingerprints? That's impossible." Collins studied him carefully. If he was lying, he was damn good at it. "Listen to me," Leo continued, leaning forward. "I didn't even know Carter personally. Yeah, I got a record, but I don't go around stabbing people in dark alleys." Collins slid another report forward. "Then explain this. Security cameras near the crime scene picked up your truck that night." Leo's face paled. He shook his head in disbelief. "No, I wasn't there." Collins's eyes narrowed. "Then why is your truck on tape?" Leo leaned back, running his hands over his face. Something wasn't right. Meanwhile, at Sarah Walker's apartment, she sat at the edge of the bed, holding Noah close. The boy still hadn't spoken. Tears streamed down her face as she gently stroked his hair. "Noah, baby, if you saw something, you have to tell me." Noah's lips parted as if he might finally say something. But then, he shook his head. Sarah burst into tears. She knew. Noah had seen something that night. And whatever it was too terrifying for him to speak. 1 week later, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, legal experts, and concerned citizens filled the room. The judge sat at the bench as Leo Walker sat in the defendant's chair, his hands clasped, jaw clenched. His lawyer, Mark Evans, shuffled through papers, looking uneasy. Across from them, prosecutor Olivia Harris stood tall, her expression sharp. Sarah held Noah's hand tightly in the gallery, watching the proceedings anxiously. The judge banged the gavel. "Order in the court. We will now begin the trial of Leo Walker, accused of the murder of Daniel Carter." Olivia stepped forward, addressing the jury. She spoke with confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a complicated case. Leo Walker is a dangerous man. His history of violence speaks for itself." She walked slowly, letting the tension settle. On the night of the murder, Daniel Carter was stabbed multiple times. The weapon was found, and guess whose fingerprints were on it? She turned to the jury. "Leo Walker's." The jury exchanged glances. Olivia continued. "And if that's not enough, a nearby security camera caught his truck near the crime scene." She faced them head-on. "This man didn't just kill Daniel Carter, he tried to silence him. And now he sits here, expecting us to believe he's innocent." She stepped back to her table, her case laid out like a sharp blade. Mark Evans stood. His posture was strong, but there was hesitation in his eyes. He knew this would be tough. "Ladies and gentlemen, what the prosecution isn't telling you is that my client, Leo Walker, is being framed." The jury shifted uncomfortably. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Yes, his fingerprints were on the weapon. Yes, his truck was near the crime scene. But let me ask you this. Do fingerprints alone prove murder?" He glanced at Noah, who lowered his head. There was one witness that night, Leo's own son, Noah. And yet, this little boy refuses to speak. Why? The jury listened carefully. Because something isn't right. Something is scaring him. Mark took a deep breath. This case is not as simple as it seems, and I intend to prove it. He sat down. The battle had begun. Officer Jenkins took the stand. He confirmed the fingerprint match and the location of Leo's truck. A forensic expert testified that the knife had only Leo's prints. Then Sarah Walker took the stand. Her voice broke as she defended Leo. My husband is not a murderer. Someone is setting him up. Olivia remained calm. Then why won't your son, the only witness, speak? Sarah's face froze. She had no answer. The courtroom fell silent. A small figure walked toward the witness stand. Noah. His little hands trembled as he sat down. The judge leaned forward. Son, do you understand that telling the truth is important? Noah nodded. Collins watched from the back of the courtroom, arms crossed. He knew something was wrong. Mark Evans knelt beside Noah, his voice gentle. Noah, did you see what happened that night? The little boy pressed his lips together. His fingers gripped the edge of the chair. He looked at his mother, then at his father. Then he slowly shook his head. A wave of whispers rippled through the courtroom. Sarah suddenly stood up. Wait, he's been drawing something. Maybe that's how he's telling us what happened. She pulled a notepad from her bag and rushed to the front. Collins leaned forward, interested. Mark flipped through Noah's drawings. The first few were just scribbles. Then he stopped. His eyes widened. He held up a drawing. The courtroom gasped. Noah had drawn a man, holding a knife. Behind him, a shadowy figure loomed. Collins stepped closer. His detective instincts kicked in. That's not just any man. Noah, who is this? Noah stared at the drawing. Then, for the first time, he slowly lifted his hand and pointed. The entire courtroom turned to follow his finger. And it wasn't pointed at his father, it was pointed at someone else. Detective Collins's heart pounded as Noah's small hand remained raised, pointing toward someone in the courtroom. A hushed murmur spread across the room. All eyes followed the boy's trembling finger. It wasn't aimed at his father, it was aimed at someone else entirely. Confusion washed over the audience. Prosecutor Olivia Harris frowned, glancing at the defense table. Mark Evans quickly turned to see who Noah was pointing at. Even Leo Walker, sitting in the defendant's chair, looked shocked. Collins took a step forward, his sharp detective instincts on high alert. Noah, he said carefully, his voice barely above a whisper. Who is it? Noah hesitated. His little hands gripped the edge of the chair. His lips quivered, but then, in a barely audible voice, he spoke. It wasn't my dad. A wave of gasps rippled through the courtroom. Sarah Walker covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Collins felt a rush of adrenaline. Then who was it, Noah? The boy didn't answer with words. Instead, he pointed again. This time, his finger landed on a man sitting in the audience. A man dressed in a dark suit wearing a police badge on his belt. Chief Richard Hale. A chilling silence took over the room. The chief of police leaned forward slightly, his face remaining eerily calm. The judge adjusted his glasses. Detective Collins, he said, his voice stern, what is the meaning of this? Collins clenched his jaw. His gut had told him something was off from the start. And now the puzzle pieces were finally coming together. He turned toward the judge. Your Honor, I believe we've been prosecuting the wrong man. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters whispered into their microphones. Spectators gasped. The bailiff called for order as the judge slammed his gavel repeatedly. Hale smirked. This is absurd, he scoffed, shaking his head. You're taking the word of a traumatized child? But Collins wasn't backing down. He reached into his briefcase, pulling out a folder. This isn't just about Noah's testimony, he said firmly. This is about evidence. Evidence that has been buried. He stepped toward the judge's bench, placing the folder down. Daniel Carter wasn't just any lawyer. He was working on a corruption case. A case involving high-ranking officials. Collins flipped open the folder. Inside were reports, financial transactions, names of officers who had taken bribes. And the man at the center of it all? Collins looked up, locking eyes with Hale. Chief Richard Hale. Another gasp spread through the courtroom. Hale's expression remained unreadable, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. The judge peered over the documents. "Detective Collins, where did you obtain these?" Collins exhaled. Daniel Carter had hidden files. He was building a case. And just before he died, he got too close to the truth. Collins glanced at Noah. And this boy saw it all. A flashback played in Collins's mind. That stormy night. Daniel Carter standing in the alley, gripping a folder filled with documents. Rain poured as a shadow approached him. "You think you can get away with this, Hale? I have proof of your corruption." Carter's voice was filled with anger and fear. Hale stepped closer, his face cold, emotionless. "You should have just kept your mouth shut." Carter turned to run, but he was too slow. Hale lunged forward, the blade flashing in the rain. A swift, brutal stab. Carter gasped, falling to his knees. The folder slipped from his grasp, scattering papers onto the wet pavement. His body slumped over, lifeless. Seconds later, Leo Walker unknowingly entered the alley. He saw the man's body, saw the blood, and rushed over. He didn't see the figure slipping into the shadows. He only saw the knife lying beside Carter's body. Instinctively, he picked it up. That's when the police arrived. That's why his fingerprints were on the weapon. The memory faded. Back in the courtroom, Collins clenched his fists. "Leo Walker was framed," he said firmly, "by the man who's supposed to uphold justice." He pointed straight at Hale. For the first time, Hale's calm facade cracked. He scoffed, shaking his head. "This is a joke." But then he reached down, adjusting something beneath his coat. Collins's instincts screamed at him. "He's going for a weapon!" Chaos erupted. Officers rushed forward, hands on their holsters. But before Hale could do anything, a bailiff tackled him to the ground. The courtroom exploded in shouts. Cameras flashed wildly as officers swarmed, handcuffing the chief of police. The judge banged the gavel. "Enough, Richard Hale, you are under arrest for the murder of Daniel Carter." Hale gritted his teeth as he was lifted to his feet. He turned to Collins, a slow, eerie smile spreading across his face. "You think you've won, detective?" he sneered. "This city is still rotten to the core." Collins met his gaze with a cold stare. "Maybe. But now, it has one less corrupt cop." The courtroom remained in stunned silence as Hale was escorted out in handcuffs. The weight of the moment settled over everyone. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, the foreman stood, clearing his throat. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Leo Walker, not guilty." Sarah let out a sob of relief. Leo's shoulders sagged as he exhaled, the weight of the world lifting off him. He turned to look at Noah, eyes filled with emotion. The judge nodded. "Leo Walker, you are free to go." Noah hesitated for only a moment before breaking into a run. He threw himself into his father's arms. Leo caught him, holding him tight, his own eyes wet with tears. "I knew you'd come back," Noah whispered. As the crowd cheered, Collins stepped outside the courtroom, inhaling the crisp air. Justice had been served. But at what cost? He walked past a newsstand. The headline already screamed, "Corrupt police chief arrested? Shocking courtroom twist." Collins smirked and shook his head. He tossed a few coins on the counter and kept walking into the night. For now, this case was over. But the fight for justice never ended. The heavy gates of the prison slowly slid open. Leo Walker stepped out, blinking against the afternoon sunlight. He was free, but there was no celebration in his eyes, just exhaustion. He scanned the small crowd in front of him. His wife, Sarah, stood a few feet away holding Noah's hand. The boy clutched his stuffed toy tightly, his face unreadable. He didn't run to his father. Leo's heart ached. He had dreamed of this moment, of wrapping his son in his arms again. But now, faced with Noah's hesitation, he felt a weight settle in his chest. He took a slow step forward. "Noah." His voice was soft, almost unsure. "I'm home." Noah didn't respond right away. He just stared at his father, his eyes searching, uncertain. Sarah gave his hand a gentle squeeze and whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy's here now." The boy hesitated, then took a small step forward, then another. He stopped right in front of Leo and looked up at him. For months, Noah had been silent, afraid, unsure. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he finally spoke. "You didn't leave me." Leo's breath caught in his throat. His eyes welled with tears. He crouched down, leveling himself with his son. "No, buddy," he said, voice breaking. "I never left you. I was just stuck. But I fought to come back." Noah studied his father's face for a long moment. Then, without warning, he dropped his stuffed toy and threw his arms around Leo's neck. Leo closed his eyes, holding his son tightly, feeling the months of pain, fear, and doubt melt away in that one embrace. Sarah wiped at her tears, watching as her family slowly pieced itself back together. Across town, outside the courthouse, officers shoved Richard Hale into the back of a police car. His face was cold, his expression unreadable. He didn't struggle. He didn't speak. But as he turned his head, he locked eyes with Detective Collins. A slow, chilling smirk crossed his lips. "You think this city is clean now?" Hale's voice was low, venomous. "You're just scratching the surface, Collins." Collins didn't flinch. He simply met Hale's gaze with a steady stare. "Maybe," he said. "But I'll keep digging until there's nothing left to hide." The police car door slammed shut. Within seconds, the vehicle disappeared down the street, taking the disgraced chief of police away. Collins watched until the taillights vanished. Later that evening, Leo, Sarah, and Noah sat together on a park bench. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the quiet lake. Noah giggled softly as he tossed breadcrumbs to a group of ducks. Sarah leaned against Leo's shoulder, their hands intertwined. "I was so scared we'd never have this again," Sarah murmured. Leo kissed her forehead. "We'll get there," he whispered. One day at a time. Noah turned to them, his small face filled with a rare sense of peace. "Can we go home now?" Leo smiled. "Yeah, buddy, let's go home." Meanwhile, Collins walked alone through the city streets. Neon lights flickered, the hum of traffic buzzing in the background. The fight for justice was never truly over. He stopped at a newsstand, glancing at the latest headline. "Police chief arrested in shocking corruption scandal." Collins smirked. He crumpled the newspaper and tossed it into a bin before continuing down the street. Justice had been served, but at what cost? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing content. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.